is Matt Russell. This is my final discussion post for MIS 605, Unit 8. The task is to create a 7 to 10 minute video explaining the steps you've taken in this project, the rationale behind the solutions you've proposed, and the steps that must be taken to complete the IS development, the information system development. So diving right in, the first thing we need to cover is the system overview. The bike sharing, so the course project was, of course, a bike sharing system that would, I guess, sit, we'd have to lease land and sit it, next to a spot with high pedestrian, foot traffic, and allow people to either create an account or just rent the bike right there on the spot. And then based on the amount of time it was rented, we bill them at the end of the cycle. A little bit less if you were a account holder, because the account holders pay a certain monthly fee, or a yearly fee, I believe. With that said, the system overview was there, I guess 3 major systems: bike rental, user management, and billing. And then the systems that will make that possible include bike stations with credit card reader and internet connection, the bikes themselves, the network equipment, a server to handle, the passing information along and storing information, user account info, that type of stuff, and billing info, etc. And then bike sharing software itself. I really enjoyed designing this part of the system. It was fun seeing how, all the different systems integrated. There was nothing that was truly standalone, but they all needed to be able to function, by themselves. For instance, billing and user management were tightly coupled because depending on whether the user had an account or did not have an account and just signed up when they rented the bike, you're going to bill them a little bit more or less. So it was important to be able to quickly access that information, generally, I guess, by being able to write smart queries, for the database. And to do that, to really write a smart query, you've got to have a smart database design, or else no query can fix, a bad database design. No matter how optimized the query is, it's still going to run into limitations for the database. So speaking of the database, I decided to use an SQL database for the design. We talked about whether or not SQL or no SQL was optimal, given that SQL is generally cheaper, just with implementation due to, everybody knows SQL. It's kind of ubiquitous in the software world, in the back-end world anyway. It tends to be a little bit cheaper because of that. And the second reason I chose SQL was because the language that we're using the data that we're going to be interacting with is fairly structured. SQL stands for structured query language. We're just handling user info, the account info, and then billing info. There's not a whole lot more than that, other than what we need to store in the actual bike sharing software. But in that case, I assume that comes with some sort of attached database that can be used to, store whether or not a bike is currently rented and different bike stats like that probably wouldn't need to be stored actually on the main database. So that was just an example of how you have to use the different systems, and even though they aren't the same system, they need to be tightly coupled and work pretty well together. So moving on to the system organization, start the transaction. They have to start the transaction really at the bike rental station. There's nowhere else they can start it other than online to create an account. But that's a different kind of transaction than actually renting a bike. That's setting up yourself so that you can rent a bike at a slightly lower fee, because you don't have to pay for the one-time checkout fee. You only have to pay for the time fee, or the duration of the ride fee, if you will. So that was really fun to kind of create and figure out how we should structure that. I think that with this type of system, the best way to move forward with any type of startup really is, unless you absolutely need the scale as soon as you start, I think it's better to start small with something like this and then gradually scale it up. So, excuse me, I thought that Microsoft Azure was probably the best modern platform for standing up the server infrastructure and the overall just software infrastructure, because it's easy to scale. If we do go from one bike rental station to 10 to 100, Azure can scale along with that just fine. And I think that, being able to scale fine is something that is, being able to scale well rather, is something that is fairly new to software, and so it can be kind of difficult still. I don't think we've really optimized it, but I think that Microsoft Azure or AWS, anything like that, can really make it a lot easier to increase server capacity, all that type of things. All it takes is for them to spin up one additional server, and boom, you can handle, if you're running one server and they spin up a second one for you, it's relatively low cost, and it can be done in a very short matter of time compared to doing it yourself, where you'd have to have system engineers, you'd have to have server architects, all that different type of stuff, constant maintenance. So it's a lot more feasible just letting the big dogs in terms of Amazon or Microsoft handle that. They're specialized and they can do that, and I can run my bike rental station. As far as security is concerned, again, I think that cost is not the largest factor here, but should be a determining factor in structuring how security is set up. To that end, I think that we should start off by just contracting a security firm that can install the security that we need, rather than rather than paying for security engineers, which are, pretty expensive overhead. It's better to just, pay a fee for a security contractor to come in, implement the firewalls, implement, security cameras if we need physical security at the rental station, which I personally think would be a good idea. But then, it costs a lot of money to hire security professionals, to hire them on full time to actually do that for one bike rental station. So in that case, I think it's better to either use a firm to do that, or, hire a contractor just for, a certain contract length, a shorter duration than hiring somebody on full time to do that security work, just as a cost saving measure. And because we haven't really reached scale yet to where we probably need an actual security staff on our payroll, just because of overhead and stuff like that. So for the major tasks for the project, we had to build the rental and billing software. We had to rent the database storage and website through Microsoft Azure, so what I chose again. Then we have to more practically obtain the lease for the land where we're going to install the bike rental stations, or at least a permit to install the bike rental stations. I'm not sure if it has to be a lease, but next we have to actually physically install the rental stations, working with a contractor to do that. We're not going to build our own, or we're not going to buy our own bulldozers and stuff like that. That'd be silly. So we've also got to then hire security contractors to install the physical security, and as well as any digital security such as data encryption, firewalls, etc. And then we need to purchase the bikes and set them up at all locations, and then run quality assurance measures to make sure everything works well, and get the billing all squared away and all that type of stuff. So this has been my Unit 8 discussion post. I really enjoyed this course. Have a great night, and thank you.